Hello, my name's John Smeaton, and on behalf of Voice of the Family, I would like to welcome you to the Family and Life Academy. Our academy opened last month with a webinar on Blessed Karl and Empress Zita, a model of family and nation, which was presented by His Excellency Edward Habsburg, a family member of Blessed Karl. In our second webinar, we're sticking to the theme of the family as we consider the topic attacks on the family, an historical overview. At the end of the presentation, there'll be time for questions which you can put into the chat window. We're very honoured that to present our webinar, we have with us today the renowned Catholic historian, Professor Roberto de Mattei. Roberto de Mattei is the president of the Lepanto Foundation. He has taught modern history and the history of Christianity in several Italian universities and has also served as vice president of the National Research Council, the highest Italian scientific institution. He's the author of 35 books, including the Second Vatican Council, An Unwritten Story, The Church in the Tempest, the First Millennium of the Church, and many, many others. Without further ado, it's my very great pleasure to introduce Professor Roberto de Mattei.
Thank you, John. Thank you. The topic before me is very broad. I will try to develop it in three parts. In the first part, I propose to define what the family is in the light of historical experience, natural philosophy, and the teaching of the Catholic Church. In the second part, I will discuss the attacks on the family throughout history, especially in the 20th century. And in the third part, I will try to point the way to a defense of the family and the reconquest of its values. The family is a society whose primary end is to transmit life and to raise children. Because it is the source of life and of a new human relationship, it constitutes the fundamental and irreplaceable cell of society. All the classical philosophers and political thinkers have affirmed it, and history has confirmed it. Well before Christianity, in ancient Rome, the familia was the cell of the civitas, and matrimony assured social stability, constituting, according to the precise definition of Cicero, the seminarium rei publici, the seedbed of society, which is born and expands from the family. A French historian, Fustel de Coulanges, in a celebrated work called The Ancient City, demonstrated how the family is the founding element of ancient civilization, both Greek and Roman. The greatness of Rome is based on the family, and the Roman families was founded on fides, the nuptial contract between the spouses. A group of families formed the gens, which recognized a common ancestor and guarded the mos maiorum, the customs of the ancients, the nucleus of the moral tradition. Christianity elevated the matrimony to the dignity of a sacrament, affirming its indissolubility. When the Roman Empire collapsed at the hands of the barbarians, the only reality which endured and formed the basis of the new society was the family. In order to understand medieval society, the French historian Régine Pernoud observes we need to study its familial organization. It is there that we find the key to the medieval period and also its originality. What was novel in that era was the presence of the authority of the church. While in the pre-Christian era, every family had its own religious cult, during the period of anarchy, which followed the fall of the Roman Empire, the ecclesiastical institutions, which had the Pope at their apex, guided spiritually and morally the rebirth of society. This was the origin of feudalism. The baron was above all the head of a family to whom other heads of families showed homage. The grouping together of feuds was the origin of kingdoms. The territory of the king is the patria, which takes its name from pater, father. The king is the father of a people, and the kingdom is governed like a family. The birth of the European nations from dawn of the year 1000 coincided with the development of the institution of the family. Moreover, the same etymology of the word nation from natus, Latin word natus, does not refer to a choice, but to birth, and indicates a set of men who have a common origin and have a blood tie. In documents, the territory in which various authorities were exercised in medieval society was uniformly called the patria, the dominion of the father, referring to the head of the family, to the feudal baron, or to the king. For over 1,000 years, the family constituted the model of political society in Europe. The French Revolution abolished the monarchy, but the paternal character of monarchical government lasted until 1918. The Austrian Empire was still ruled by a monarchical and familial system. And in traditional monarchic law, the king performed a public mission in the service of the people to whom he was like a father. But the family is not only the first element of the state from an historical point of view, but also from a constitutive point of view. The family is the fundamental cell, the constitutive element of the state, affirms Pius XII, citing Pius XI's encyclical letter Casti Connubi. The Church teaches that the family is not a simple union between two individuals, but a social institution, nor it is just one social institution among others, but a social institution based on a sacrament, the sacrament of matrimony. And this led to many consequences. In a discourse given in 1946, Pius XII affirmed that the two pillars of the civil order, the two columns of society, which were conceived and willed by God, are the family and the state. There is a strict rapport between the family and the state, on which basis the prosperity of nations depends on the prosperity of families, and on the contrary, the decline of nations is linked to the decline of the institution of the family. The existence of this bond is logical and evident. From our births, we are all members of a society because, as the book of Genesis says, it is not good for man to be alone. With man is born every form of society, the family, the state, and the church, which, since it is founded and headed by Jesus Christ, is the most important society of all. And for this reason, the magisterium of the church has always spoken of the family as the first cell of society, the image and model for all society, which is born from the family and expands from the family. Pius XII writes, every family extends and expands itself in the relation which the bonds of the blood unite, and the alliance of different families through their harmonious agreements compose, link by link, a net whose harmony and solidarity assures the vital unity of a nation, the great family of the great home that is the fatherland. The family is based on marriage, and marriage, as Pius XI explains in the encyclical Castigo Nubi, following St. Augustine, marriage consists of three great goods: proles, fides, sacramentum, children, fidelity, and the sacrament. The proles is the purpose of marriage, which is ordained to the procreation and education of children. But the proles presupposes a pact of fidelity between the spouses, which is the fides. Marriage is a contract which is born from the free consent of two spouses, but which cannot be dissolved by their will, because it is rendered indissoluble by the sacrament. The sacramentum, symbol of the divine creation and of the image of the church as the spouse of Christ, well, the sacramentum is the sacramentum which makes the matrimonial contract indissoluble. Fides and proles are both part of other traditions, while the sacramentum characterizes only the Christian family and makes it sacred. Sacramentum, fides, and proles are not separate elements, but form a whole, because there is a relationship between the natural and supernatural order, distinct but connected. The entire life of the church is organized around the seven sacraments. Marriage is the sacrament which indissolubly unites man and woman and gives them a specific grace to live together and educate their children. Marriage, like holy orders, is a sacrament with a social character. This social purpose is both natural and supernatural. It is to procreate and educate children destined for heaven. Eternal salvation is the supernatural end of every human being who comes into existence. Thus, the Christian family is not only seminarium rei publice, as Cicero defined it, but also Seminarium Ecclesiae. It is the first cell of both the state and the church. The church militant on earth is formed by families, both natural and religious, and is herself a great family under the guide of the Pope and bishops. It is for this reason that marriage is placed under the watchful care of the Church. Many documents of the Church in the last 2 centuries reiterate this teaching, but the most ample and articulate of these are the encyclicals Arcanum by Leo XIII, Castico Nubi by Pius XI, and this teaching would be reconfirmed in many documents of Pius XII, and also in the Apostolic Exhortation Familiaris Consortio by John Paul II in 1981. But there is an attack to the family, the most violent attack that the family has ever undergone in the West was with the Cultural Revolution of 1968, the revolution against the family conducted in the name of sexual liberation. But the hate for the family characterizes all the phases of that revolution which has assaulted the church and Christian civilization for over 5 centuries. Let us start with a fateful date, the 14th of July, 1789, the symbolic start of the French Revolution, the day on which the Bastille fell, a fortress which the revolutionaries believed was overflowing with political prisoners, and instead held only 7 common criminals, among whom was the Marquis Alphonse François de Sade. The Marquis de Sade is known as the author of pornographic novels, and his name is tied to sexual perversion. But in reality, he was a philosopher, a French philosopher who, after having been freed, actively participated in the revolution. On the 1st of July 1790, he became an active citizen of the Jacobin section of Place Vendôme, which went down in history as the square of the beatings. And on the 3rd of September 1792, while the famous September massacres began, he was named secretary and a year later president of the Jacobin section. Citizen Sade composed numerous political writings during the revolution, of which the most famous is called Français encore un effort, si vous voulez être républicaine, yet another effort, Frenchman, if you want to be Republican. In this text, he invited the French to put into practice all the principles of 1789 and extirpate the roots of Christianity. He writes, you who have the axe in hand, give the final blow to the tree of superstition. Europe waited to be delivered from the scepter and the altar. And this is the ideology of the French Revolution of 1789. And once freedom of conscience and of the press is completely admitted, namely to give to all the freedom to act If everything can be said, everything can be allowed. And so Sard listed the following revolutionary achievements: blasphemy, theft, homicide, and every type of sexual perversion, incest, rape, sodomy. He writes, never has sensuality been considered a criminal according to the wise of the earth. All the philosophers know well that it is only Christian impostors have transformed it into a crime. One, for Sard, one could freely vent impulses and desires, including mating with animals, since there is no qualitative difference for him between men and animals. Both are born, procreate, deteriorate, and every sexual difference is obliterated. The supreme aspiration is to abolish all differences and inequalities in order to drive society into primordial chaos. Noircel, a character in l'Histoire de Juliette of Sade, says the words of this protagonist of Juliette. He says, I wanted to marry twice in the same day. At 10 in the morning, dressed as a woman. I desired to marry a man. At 12, dressed as a man, I desired to marry a homosexual dressed as a woman. So, you see, all gender theory is already contained in these words. Marquis de Sade spent the last years of his life in an insane asylum. His lucid folly made him a prophet of the revolution. Eric Cunelt-Ledeen defines him as the patron saint of all leftist movements. And the last 2 centuries have seen his plans realized to a great extent. That which has not yet come to pass may still be part of our future. He has the merit, in our eyes, of not having left in the dark any of the goals of the revolution. And while Sade theorized a revolutionary pansexualism, the French Revolution itself started a process of a radical reform of the institution of the family with the introduction of divorce in 1791. The divorce which Napoleonic law would extend to the whole continent. The origin of divorce arises from the Protestant Revolution, but its introduction into European society happened thanks to the French Revolution. All of the leaders of the Protestant Revolution permitted divorce, beginning with Martin Luther in his work De Captivitate Babylonica. Luther denied that matrimony is a sacrament, and consistent with this position, denied its indissolubility. He affirmed that matrimony could be dissolved by infidelity on the part of one of the spouses. Divorce spread widely in the following centuries in Lutheran, Calvinist, and Anglican countries. But civil divorce was officially introduced in a public institution only after the French Revolution. According to Article 7 of the Constitution of 1791, the law considers matrimony only as a civil contract. The law of the 20th of September 1792 introduced the concept of civil marriage, which was unknown previously. The Church, which already in the Council of Trent had reaffirmed the sacramental character of marriage, claimed its right over marriage with several important documents, such as in the 19th century, the encyclical Arcanum by Leo XIII. But the principles of the French Revolution were diffused in all of Europe by the civil code of Napoleon of 1805, which, in addition to divorce, affirmed the obligatory equal division of the paternal patrimony between all of the children. From the moment that marriage was considered only as a civil contract, the state claimed that it had the right to regulate it. But with divorce, the family ceased to be a natural institution and became a consensual pact between individuals, destined to be able to be dissolved at any moment and for whatever reason. The supreme law became that of the self-determination of the individual. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of Citizen of 1789 attributed to man the possibility of doing whatever he wants, even to his own harm, ignoring or denying every natural and moral law, with the only limit of not causing harm to the freedom of others. Freedom, declares Article 4 of the Declaration, consists in being able to do whatever does not harm others. Thus, the exercise of the natural rights of each man has only those limits which assure to other members of society the enjoyment of those same rights. Such limits, the Declaration specifies, may be determined only by law, which, according to the Article 6 of the text, is the expression of the general will. Well, these principles gave rise to socialist ideology of people like Sade, and in the 19th century of Charles Fourier, a French socialist, who in his phalanstère called for the uninhibited freedom of the passions in order to reach the highest point of social evolution. But this utopic socialism was surpassed by the so-called scientific socialism of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. The American ethnologist Lewis Henry Morgan, starting from the existing family relationship among the Iroquois of North America, conceived a fantastic theory of the family, tracing the origins to a primitive throne in which sexual relations were totally promiscuous and not subject to any rules. Marx and Engels enthusiastically subscribed to this materialistic conception, which confirmed Darwinian theories, and Engels' book, The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the and the State, published in 1884. This book is an attack on the fundamental institutions of society to bring about the utopian classless society, which is the totally egalitarian society without the family, without private property, without the state, and without God. Engels pretends to demonstrate scientifically that the family is not a natural reality, but an arbitrary superstructure produced by history and destined to disappear. According to Engels, the family is not a natural reality because there is no stable and permanent nature of man. In the Marxist perspective, all that exists is matter animated by continual movement. Nothing is permanent, but everything changes and is transformed. In primitive times, according to Engels, humanity lived not only in the communism of goods, but also in sexual promiscuity, and only successively in the society of classes born with a private property was the family born, where the woman is the victim and the man is the exploiter. In addition, there is a relationship between familial alienation and the exploitation of the oppressed class, the proletariat. The movement to communism will thus include the liberation of the woman by way of the suppression of the family and of marriage. And the social model for communism is the life of primitive men, such as those who are still living in the Amazon. The Bolshevik Revolution of Lenin and Trotsky realized the ideas of Marx and Engels. In this sealed courage that brought the professional revolutionaries back to Petrograd in April 1917, with Lenin, Zinoviev, and Radek, also traveled Inessa Armand, member of the executive committee of the Bolshevik Party, foundress of the Zenod Tel, the women's department of the party. A woman who had the absolute confidence of Lenin, who was her lover. She died of cholera in 1920 and had the honor of being buried in the Red Cemetery under the walls of the Kremlin with the principal protagonists of the revolution. Her name is less known than that of Alexandra Kollontai, but her influence on Lenin was perhaps greater. Well, Inessa Armand and Alexandra Kollontai publicly advocated free love and fought for the introduction of divorce and abortion in Russia. They were convinced that sexual liberation was a necessary premise for bringing about a socialist society. And so the Bolsheviks introduced the divorce on the 17th of December 1917, a few weeks after they rose the power. Abortion was legalized in 1920, the first time in the world that the procedure was available without restriction. And also prostitution and homosexuality were decriminalized in 1922. The following year, Trotsky wrote, "The first destructive period is still far from being over in the life of the family. The disintegrating process is still in full swing." In 1920, in the second issue of the magazine Kommunistka, Alexandra Kollontai wrote, in place of the individual and egoistic family, a great universal family of workers will develop, in which all the workers, men and women, will above all be comrades. This is what relations between men and women in the communist society will be like. These new relations will ensure for humanity all the joys of a love unknown in the commercial society, of a love that is free and based on the true social equality of the partners. The red flag of the social revolution, which flies above Russia and is now being hoisted aloft in other countries of the world, proclaims the approach of the heaven on earth to which humanity has been aspiring for centuries. This is Alexandra Kollontai. And the transition from the political revolution to the sexual revolution was formulated in Russia and Germany in the 1920s and 30s. In 1922, a meeting was held at the Marx Engels Institute of Moscow, directed by David Ryazanov, to examine the concept of cultural revolution, or a total revolution which would involve man himself, his nature, his customs, his deepest being. The Marx Engels Institute of Moscow was connected to analogous institutions born in those same years. In 1919, Dr. Magnus Hirschfeld founded the Institut für Sexualwissenschaft, the Institute for Sexology in Berlin, with the goal of normalizing homosexuality. And Hirschfeld organized in 1921 the first Congress for Sexual Reform, which led to the formation of the World League for Sexual Reform, a league for coordinating knowledge about the enhancement of sexual activity. Grigory Batkis, director of the Moscow Institute for Sexual Hygiene, led the Soviet delegation to the First World League for Sexual Freedom Conference. And in the same years, in 1923, Felix Weil, a German, financed the Erste Marxistische Arbeitswoche, the first Marxist work week, in the German town of Limenau. The success of this event led him to found the Institut für Sozialforschung, Institute for Social Research, directed from 1930 to 1958 by the famous philosopher Max Horkheimer. The Frankfurt Institute was at the origin of the Marxist Hegelian Frankfurt School and collaborated with the Moscow Institute for the publication of the works by Marx and Engels. But if Marxism attacks the philosophical basis of familial institution, Sigmund Freud attacks its moral foundation. The family is, in fact, a reservoir of moral values that arise from the effort of generations to progress morally and materially. Freud opposed Christian morality based on the spirit of sacrifice with a hedonist morality based on pleasure, the libido, which constitutes the hinge of psychoanalytic theory. Freud introduced two new ethical categories, the repression and the liberation of instincts. Man out to free himself from repressive morality, which prevents him from realizing himself in order to give free outlet to his own desires and sexual urges. In 1929, the Soviet political leaders invited a student of Freud, the Austrian psychoanalyst Wilhelm Reich, for a series of conferences which led to the publication in Moscow of his paper Dialectical Materialism and Psychoanalysis, which constitutes the founding text of so-called Freudo-Marxism. In this and in his later works, Reich presented the family as the repressive social institution par excellence and affirms that the nucleus of happiness is sexuality. For him, the abolition of family is necessary and the revolution from sex negation to sex affirmation. Reich, who dedicates the second part of the sexual revolution to the struggle for the new life in the Soviet Union, was a great admirer of Vera Schmidt's nursery school, created in 1921 in downtown Moscow, where small children were initiated to masturbation and early sexual excitement. And Reich states that her work, the work of Vera Schmidt, was entirely in the direction of affirming infant sexuality. Trotsky supported the work of Vera Schmidt and the ideas of Wilhelm Reich. The Reich's sexual revolution was an essential part of Trotsky's permanent revolution. But like any revolution, the Bolsheviks experienced an internal dialectic. One tendency was that of Stalin, who, without giving up on terror, was forced to moderate revolutionary radicalism in order to keep power. The other tendency was that of Trotsky, who accused Stalin of having betrayed the revolution. Trotsky's defeat marked the end of this sexual revolution in Russia, but the subsequent failure of Stalinism in the 1950s saw the victory of Trotskyism, which affirmed itself in the world with the Cultural Revolution of 1968. Reich's ideas, disowned by Stalin, spread in the West and met those of the Frankfurt School, the representatives of which were able to occupy key places in important American universities like Harvard, Berkeley, and San Diego. Herbert Marcuse, researcher of the Horkheimer Institute, in his bestseller Eros and Civilization, and the other One-Dimensional Man, reduced human nature to the free yielding to sexual impulses, as did Reich. And these ideas were the basis of a cultural revolution which did not compromise the previous ones, but led to something worse, the thirst of a generation which not only lost itself corporally, but physically. The fundamental thesis of 1968 is the one which says that Marxism must be overcome because it limited itself to a political revolution without extending this subversion of values to the field of culture, and daily life. One of the foundational texts of 1968 was the book The Death of the Family by the theoretician of anti-psychiatry, David Cooper. For him, the bourgeois happy family is indissoluble, and thus it is the mother of all social repressions. The madness is not only the response to pathological institutions like the family, but it is, for Cooper, a value in itself, the foundation of a new political consciousness. It should be added that the theoreticians of the destruction of the family who prepared the revolution of 1968 did not limit themselves to works of philosophical theory, but coherent with Marxist principles according to which the true revolutionary practically demonstrates in the praxis the strength of his own ideas. They developed concrete projects to seize power. The Italian communist Antonio Gramsci was the theoretician who most deeply elaborated this strategy for conquest in the West. In the United States, Roger Kimball wrote an interesting book called The Long March: How the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s Changed America. Kimball observes, a cultural revolution, whatever the political ambitions of its architects, results, first of all, in a metamorphosis in values and in the conduct of life. The American author with the most radical conception of the long march through the institutions was Saul Alinsky. Hillary Clinton is among the disciples of Alinsky. Clinton's senior thesis at Wellesley College in 1968 was written on Alinsky with the title "There is Only the Fight, an Analysis of the Alinsky Model." And like Gramsci, Alinsky also maintained an absolute ethical relativism. Relativism is the cultural vision that dominates our times. There is no natural law, no absolute and universal principles. Everything depends on historical circumstances and the intentions of the subject. Today, the utopic dimension of 1968 is fallen, and postmodern relativism is left as its heritage expressed by intellectuals like Michel Foucault. Foucault theorized the importance of the thought of Sade in his work Histoire de la Folie. And under the influence of Foucault, the American author Judith Butler was one of the first to develop gender theory, which constitutes the last frontier of postmodern ideologies. Evolutionary materialism remains the subjected philosophy which sees man as changing material without a proper nature, which can be molded at will according to desires and the willpower of everyone. According to the gender theory, there is no masculine or feminine identity rooted in human nature, but what we define as masculine and feminine, man and woman, are only historical constructs, roles given by society which have nothing to do with biological sex. Gender theory finds its roots in the evolutionism of Marx and Engels, the psychoanalysis of Freud and Reich, the feminism and homosexualism of authors like Michel Foucault. In the perspective of these authors, man does not have his own essence or specific nature. His body is unformed matter, which can be manipulated as one pleases according to necessity. A process of radicalization has progressed in a logical and consistent manner from gender studies to queer studies, from homosexualism to pansexualism, from cyborgs to today's transhumanism movement. The so-called xenofeminism of Helen Hester, who is a founding member of the Laboria Cubonics collective. The xenofeminism, for example, represents the latest and most radical expression of this feminist biopolitics. Helen Hester, who links up with other post-feminists such as Donna Haraway and Shulamit Firestone, has developed her ideas in the manifesto Xenofeminism, a Politics for Alienation. And she develops a three-part definition of xenofeminism, grounded in the ideas of techno-materialism, anti-naturalism, and gender abolitionism. So xenofeminist theory affirms the abolition of gender through an infinite multiplication of genders and identities according to one's subjective tendencies and tastes, instead of eliminating differences between genders. She says, we want them to proliferate. Let 100 different sexualities flourish. The recognition of innumerable genders is only a first step towards refusing to accept any gender as an immutable criterion of meaning. So gender has to be refused as an immutable criterion of meaning. These are utopian and contradictory ideas, but utopia and contradiction is the soul of error. Truth, on the other hand, does not change. It follows immutable rules. It has an objective and universal value. This is why Pius XI in Castico Nubi invites us to meditate on the divine idea of the family and the marriage, and with the help of God to live in conformity with this idea. The Christian family today needs above all to be defined, because one cannot love and live out what one does not know profoundly. Pius XI recalls a maxim which comes from sound philosophy and from sacred theology. To restore to their pristine state, he affirms, Pius XI, according to their nature, the things which have deviated from rightness, there is no other way than to bring them back to conformity with divine reason, which is the exemplar of perfect rightness. And thus it is necessary, in order to restore a right order in the matter of marriage, that all consider the divine design concerning marriage and seek to conform themselves to it. What does it mean to meditate on the family? It means meditating not only on the positive model that the family presents, but also meditating on the process of subversion of the family that has developed especially since the French Revolution. Every organism develops on the basis of a principle and dissolves on the basis of the negation of that principle. The principle on which family life is based in the existence of an order of absolute values rooted in man's nature, a nature that man has not self-constructed and that therefore cannot deconstruct, but has received from God, who has established laws that govern the life of man, human society, and the entire universe. It is necessary, above all, to recover the natural and the divine idea of the family as a permanent and stable model which does not change over the course of centuries, a model which may undergo eclipses and have a crisis, but which has an intrinsic perfection. Such a conception of the family is founded on the idea that man is born within a given historical condition which has insurmountable limits, beginning with death, that an objective and unchangeable nature exists, that this nature has its origin in God, creator of the order of the universe. The Catholic Church, in her teaching, has always confirmed this conception of man and society. The family is a true juridical and moral society founded on matrimony and intended for the transmission of life and the raising of children. The origin of the family and of matrimony is in human nature. The child is not born because of his own choice, and he is not autonomous. The law of birth and the raising of the child is dependence. Dependence is the law of humanity reunited in society. Everything depends on something. Nothing is determined by itself. The principle of causality rules the universe. This rule belongs to the first and indemonstrable principles which Aristotle already discerned from reality. The rejection of reality, the rejection of evidence, the rejection of logic is the characteristic of the errors we face. These errors lead to imbalance and madness, both individual and social. Only those who follow the immutable laws of logic, metaphysics, and morality, illuminated by the light of the faith, are able to rebuild a society that is today self-destructing. Thank you. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you, Professor. Thank you very much indeed. We do have a few questions, and we've just got a little bit of time to put them to you. We'll see how we get on. Our first question is very short and straight to the point. Why did Stalin reject the sexual revolution?
This is a very interesting question. We must remember the fundamental difference between 19th century utopian socialism and Marxism. The utopians of the 19th century were revolutionary philosophers who lived in the field of ideas, abstract doctrine. Marx, in his glosses to Feuerbach, announces that the task of philosophers is not to know the world, but to change it. And to change it, and so this is and what Marx wants to say, it is that it is in the praxis that the philosopher verifies the truth of his ideas. This means that there is no truth outside of revolutionary praxis. Well, Stalin realized that the total destruction of the family would weaken his power, and so for this reason Stalin stopped the sexual revolution, which was introduced by Trotsky in Russia. At this moment, Trotsky accused Stalin of betraying the revolution, not only because Stalin blocked the sexual revolution, but also because Stalin, with his totalitarian regime, made the dictatorship of the proletariat permanent. But Stalin replied that Trotsky was living in the clouds, and that the real Marxist was him, Stalin, who held power, and not Trotsky, because Trotsky had not power. So Trotsky was marginalized, forced to emigrate, and then killed in the name of a revolutionary praxis. So this is the key, the revolutionary praxis. Dictators, if they wanted to retain power, cannot completely destroy the family on which every state rests, because family is the nature. And this is the reason why, for example, Putin too has restored certain family values in Russia. But Russia, from Lenin's time until today, remains the country in the world with, for example, the highest number of abortions.
Thank you, Professor. I think we've got time for one more question, and it's this. What is the best response to people who believe the modern maxim that they're free to do whatever doesn't harm others?
This is also an interesting question. Well, if we assert that freedom consists in doing whatever does not harm others, the basis of freedom becomes my individual good, which can be in harmony or in contrast with the good of another individual. But in the case of a contrast, very common case, between what I consider my good and what another individual considers his good, which good prevails, mine or that of the others, or the other? What prevails is clearly the good of the stronger. An example: in the case of abortion, two interests are in conflict: the good of the unborn child and what the mother claims to be her own good. Who prevails with abortion? Not what is right, but the interest of the stronger, which is the mother in this case. So freedom is founded on the act of the will of individuals. Instead, freedom must be founded on a natural law that establishes certain objective and universal principles valid for all times and places. And so natural law, natural and divine law transcends individuals, but is inscribed in the heart of every man, and must be the universal rule of society. In the case of conflict between the individuals, when natural law is invoked, what prevails is not force, but law. And modern liberal democracies are founded on force. Christian society is founded on law.
Well, thank you, Professor. Thank you very much indeed. I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. I do apologize if your question hasn't been answered. Thank you for everyone for joining today. A video of this webinar will be made available on the Family and Life Academy website. And you may wish to take the opportunity of joining one of our Academy courses. Finally, our heartfelt thanks once more, Professor de Mattei, for your most illuminating and profound presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.